Good afternoon, members. It's the appointed time, and we have formed a quorum. Welcome to the meeting of the Subcommittee on Members' Remuneration and Operating Expenses Reimbursement. We will use the request to speak system, so members please do not change seats after you are seated. We will now elect the Deputy Chair of the Subcommittee. The Secretariat of the Subcommittee has published a notice informing members that only one valid nomination for the office of Deputy Chair was received by the close of the nomination period. The nominee is Mr. Dennis Leung. He was nominated by Mr. Kitson Young, and the nomination was seconded by Mr. Stephen Ho. According to paragraph 8D of Appendix 4 of the House Rules, if any valid nomination is received for the office of Deputy Chair, the subcommittee may decide whether there is a need to elect a Deputy Chair. I now ask members whether we agree to elect a Deputy Chair. Those who agree, please raise your hands. So we all agree. Well, members agree, and we've only received one nomination. So I now declare Mr. Dennis Leung elected as the Deputy Chair of the Subcommittee. Now we move on to Agenda Item 2, outstanding issues relating to members' remuneration and operating expenses reimbursement from the 6th Legislative Council. Please refer to LC paper number HRA 8/2023. A major task of the subcommittee is to review members' remuneration and operating expenses reimbursement and make recommendations on the relevant arrangements for members of the following term for consideration by the Independent Commission on Remuneration for members of the Executive Council and the Legislature and officials under the political appointment system of the HKSAR. The subcommittee formed in the previous term of the LegCo proposed to use a weighted index as the basis for annual adjustment to members' office operation expenses reimbursement, but the government did not accept the proposal in the end. I was in the subcommittee of the previous term, and there was a detailed discussion on this weighted index proposal. We were of the view that it is a more scientific approach to use the weighted index proposal. The Secretariat prepared a background brief. I mentioned the paper number just now. The paper includes the work schedule of the subcommittee and the proposals made by the subcommittees in the previous terms. The paper has been circulated to members. I'll now invite the Secretariat to walk us through the paper. Thank you, Chair. As mentioned, one of the major tasks of the subcommittee is to review the remuneration and expenses reimbursement arrangements for LegCo members of the following term. Before the start of a new LegCo term, in at least 1 year's time before the start of a new term, we have to complete the review. And after the review, any proposals to change the level of remuneration and operating expenses reimbursement will be put forward to the government for consideration. The Independent Commission is appointed by the Chief Executive, and it will advise the government on the remuneration package for members, and it will carry out periodic reviews. The terms of reference and the membership of the Independent Commission are in Appendices 1 and 2. There are 6 members in the Commission, including Mr. Tong Ka Seng, who serves as the chair of the Commission. And 1 year before the commencement of the new LegCo term, the Commission will start the review. if the government accepts the recommendations, funding approval from the Finance Committee will be sought where appropriate for the implementation of the recommendations. The subcommittee formed in the 6th LegCo conducted 2 surveys to gauge members' views on the level of remuneration and operating expenses reimbursement for members of the 7th LegCo. As mentioned, most of the members agreed to the proposal that a weighted index instead of Consumer Price Index C should be used as the basis for annual adjustment to members' office operation expenses reimbursement, or OOER. What is OOER? It is a major part of the operating expenses of members of the LegCo. Now the reimbursement ceiling is $2.8 million. It covers the staff expenses, office accommodation expenses, for instance, utility charges and rents, etc. And the third part is other operating expenses. Members of the previous subcommittee were of the view that the weighted index should replace the Consumer Price Index C. 2 surveys were conducted in the last term. In the second survey, members were asked if they had other proposals. Some other proposals were raised, but they were not the view of the majority of the members. So only the weighted index proposal was submitted to the government in the end. In the previous term, members were of the view that there should be 3 components to the weighted index proposal. The first component is salary expenses. Members were of the view that it should account for 70% of the weighting, and it should replace Consumer Price Index C, and that the civil service pay adjustment for the middle and lower salary bands should be used as a reference in calculating the salary expenses. The second component is the office accommodation expenses, and members were of the view that it should count for 10% of the weighting, and that the rental index for Grade C offices should be used as a reference. The third component is the other operating expenses, and it counts for 20% of the weighting, and that the composite consumer price index should be used as a reference. In 2020, a report was made, and the independent commission supported the proposal. However, the commission was of the view that under salary expenses, the nominal index of payroll per person should be used to calculate instead of the civil service pay adjustment for the middle and lower salary bands. Details are in Appendix 3. And you can see a comparison between the 2 proposed indexes. The proposed figures by the subcommittee is higher than the ones proposed by the independent commission. However, the one proposed by the independent commission is still higher than the one being used now with reference to the Consumer Price Index C. Apart from the weighted index proposal, the independent commission also proposed that there should be a one-off increase of 3% of the level of the annual OOER, and that there should be an abolishing of the 1/3 reduction in the LegCo monthly remuneration for members who also serve on the ExCo. The CE in Council considered it inappropriate to take forward the Commission's proposals because of the economic downturn and also have to take into consideration the labor earnings and employment situation. So the C in Council decided that the remuneration package for members of the 6th LegCo should continue to be adopted for members of the 7th LegCo. Members of the subcommittee of the 6th LegCo expressed disappointment for the decision. There were various proposals made by the previous terms subcommittees, and the details are provided in Appendix 4. For instance, there was the end of service gratuity, a medical allowance, and also there was adjustment to the office operation expenses, reimbursement, etc., showing that the government did accept some of the proposals made by the members of the previous term. On the weighted index proposal, it was first proposed during the 4th LegCo term. There was a detailed discussion last year. However, as mentioned, the government was of the view that it was inappropriate to endorse the proposal. So we would like to have members' views on what other issues to be reviewed by the subcommittee in the coming months. Thank you. I will say a few words on the weighted index proposal. In the subcommittee formed in the previous term, during the meeting, members were of the view that the OOER should not only be based on the consumer price index. It would not reflect the reality by just taking the CPIC as a reference. Operation situations are different for various members. However, the expenses comprise of staff expenses and also office accommodation expenses, as well as other operating expenses, including equipment needed, etc. For these 3 expenses, the amount may differ for various members' offices. However, a survey was done, and the weighting of 70%, 10%, and 20% were suggested. So salary expenses accounting for 70% of the weighting, office accommodation expenses accounting for 10%, and other operating expenses 20%. And we suggested to adjust the salary expenses based on the civil service pay adjustment for the middle and lower salary bands, because we may want to compare the salary expenses with the salary of civil servants. And we suggested to make reference to the rental index for grade C offices instead of grade A offices as we calculate the weighting for office accommodation expenses. And for the other operating expenses, we suggested using the composite consumer price index as a reference. The proposal was passed on to the independent commission, and the commission endorsed the proposal. As mentioned, it was suggested that the salary expenses should be adjusted with reference to the civil service pay adjustment for the middle and lower salary bands. However, there were also suggestions that nominal index of payroll per person. We preferred the former one. It should be reasonable. We should use a salary index or wage index. However, it was a pity that the previous term government did not accept the proposal. Later on, we can have a further discussion on view of the level of remuneration and operating expenses reimbursement.
意見，咁然後咧，我哋係
Third agenda item, we will continue with our follow-up actions. So, what will we consult? For this subcommittee, it differs from other subcommittee or panel meetings. There is have to declare interest. As we are not the members being affected, we are Mr. Yang Wen-kit first. In relation to the 6th and the 7th term, I agree to you. It is a very scientific approach, and it sounds very reasonable to me as well. The Chief Executive Council, having considered different factors such as the local economic downturn, labor earnings, and the employment situation, these change. There is a possibility that the chief executive will accept it. The financial secretary said that the situation is completely different. Under these circumstances, executive to consider the weighted index. It is a reasonable and a scientific approach. With the salary of civil servants using rating and evaluation. For the next term of the Legislative Council members, using this method to make adjustments is reasonable. Thank you. And operating expenses. Using this method is scientific. Upward or downward. It is also more in touch with the reality. Next, Mr. Lai Tong-kwok. Thank you, Chairman. While we were working on this, our decision, our conclusion was accepted. Despite some differences, it was probably Council was not denied, nor did it deny the suggestion made by the independent commission. Will always be here. So we should tell the government that they shouldn't or they cannot use these. For this term, we have 90 members, and I believe that in the next term, we will also have 90 members. I cannot see any impact on the government. Says all members have been working very hard, and they also the salaries are indeed very meager. If we ask too much of our members who are earning such meager income, that is very not beneficial to our members and the development of the council. We need members should enjoy reasonable wages. Reflect the situation to the government. We need to do our best to reflect the situation. Next, for some members, that is, for members that are both LegCo members and exec. If a member takes up 2 jobs, they will not work less. Equally the same. Society expects so. Why do we still have to deduct the salaries of the members by 1/3? That is not reasonable. Member shoulders different responsibilities, takes up 1, 2, 3, or even 4 jobs. Deduct the wages of the members, for fear that some may consider this a kind of discrimination. That is my comment. In the last term, while we were considering the weighted index, we didn't consider whether the operating think given the amount comprises these 3 amounts, then we can arrive, well, we can. So I agree with Mr. Lai. The reason for rejection on the part of the government for members who have 2 roles or 3 roles, they still expect the members to do their level best. Mr. Frankie Yik. Thank you, Chairman. It is my first time to be for the wage increase. C. There are consumer price index A, B, C. I compare the data from the changes in the consumer price index A and C. I found that there is a difference. I mean, we are 3.2% behind. should we follow the composite consumer price index? It will be more appropriate, as it combines the three types of CPI and takes a general view. Well, I think that we should follow the composite consumer price index. In paragraph 7 of the paper, I don't quite understand. The IC suggests that there should be a one-off increase in the level of the annual OOER by 3% from the then amount. So should we follow the consumer price index C? The report means that at least for the first time in the next term, this amount should be increased by 3% then, as per the established mechanism, that is the consumer price index C adjustments will be made. From 2013 to 2021, the difference is 3.2%. I'm not sure if the IC means that we would be given 3.2% in order to catch up all the differences, but I do not agree that we should follow the consumer price index C. I think that we should follow the composite consumer price index. I do agree with our proposal. There is a pay trend survey. It was said that the lower band should enjoy not fair. I'm not talking about Legislative Council members. I'm talking about frontline staff such as assistants. Next, Mr. Stephen Ho. My opinion is roughly the same as Mr. Frankie Yick's. The CPIC, it covers 10% of the households in Hong Kong. $48,000 to $99,000 or so. How many staff members? In the past decade, apart from 3%, what was the highest percentage of wage using the reason of labor earnings and the employment situation? The increase wage increase when the economy was buoyant. That is, there are grave difficulties. Inflation. Sometimes the operating expenses cannot even catch up the inflation rate. So I think that the government should for the wages in the forthcoming 4 years. They actually serve as consultants, and that is not a full-time position for our members working for us. The wage increase of the civil servants of the same rank. Servants, even if the civil service pay is on frozen pay, then their salary increments will also entitle are earning less of wage increase. Apart from a frozen show us the wage increase in the past 5 years. Apart from 3% of the year saw less than 2% of salary increase. Do you have any information at hand, Secretariat?
We don't have the relevant in hand. For the changes in the consumer price index, it was from 0.2% to 2%. So we adjusted the salary based on this index. How will we increase the salary? Every year when the government considers adjusting the there was sometimes adjustment made. For instance, starting from the increased by 7%. When was the last time it was increased? Well, the latest 3%. Well, it was recommended, but the government did not accept the proposal. And then, starting from the 6th term, there was ER. For claims that can be made by members during the term of LegCo, it was suggested that there should be a 15%, and it took effect starting from the 4th term. Next, Dr. Hui Simon Lee. I'm not sure how the percentage is set by the government, so it's hard for me to make any comment. I have a suggestion, though. As we approach the government again, can we, before we talk to the government, collect views from members to see needed by members for them to achieve their plans. After the improved electoral system is in place, members of the LegCo have changed. Also, in terms of appropriate for us to stick to the current mechanism. Apart from the weighted index proposal, I think an increase in the number of these officials or members. And so we have had difficulties in retaining staff working for members. In order to offer a reasonable salary to retain staff and members, I think we do have to take a holistic approach as we consider the situation in Hong Kong has changed. So we have to consider a host of various factors. I agree with what Mr. Steve. For instance, we may have to keep the salary in line with the level of officials at a similar ranking. Even if we offer a may be more willing to work for the government instead. So we should offer the same amount of salary for staff work for LegCo members as well as those working for the government. We should offer more salary to those working for LegCo members in order for us to retain. That's my suggestion. Next, we have Mr. Kenneth Leung. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to offer my views on members' operating expenses reimbursement. Members mentioned about the need to retain staff. We wouldn't be able to carry out so many studies and research the members said previously. I think we should treat them better. Some statistics. Previously, the Independent Commission recommended making a one-off increase by 3%. Even with the one-off increase, is that enough? I think we have. The situation now is different from that of a few years ago. Not sure if it is right for me to suggest this now. Well, every year there is an for us to set up offices. For instance, there is refurbishment work that has to be done. Now in the CITIC Tower, according to the schedule, they will move back to the Legislative complex if the works are completed in time. Will we consider offering a expenses reimbursement to those currently stationing at the CITIC Tower for them to move back to the Legislative complex? Will we offer some sort of compensation to those who need to move back to the Legislative complex? On the MPF offsetting mechanism, I think the mechanism will take effect on the 1st of May 2025, and this term on the 31st of December. And I wonder if the offsetting mechanism will have any impact on our Next, Mr. Dennis Leung. I'm a member, and we always ask employers to treat their employees well. Well, I, as a member of the I may not be treating my staff well. I have to convince my staff that a meaningful job, and let's see if we will be able to adjust the salary soon. This review, I think it is disappointing that the government did not take into consideration the weighted index proposal. I think we need to see the changes in the amount of operating expenses and the salary and the rents we need to pay, and that the operating expenses reimbursement that we get should be consistent with that of the market level. And we've been talking about improving governance at the district level. The district councillors will have to be responsible for keeping its views of the community and reflect that to the government. So it is a very important job, and I think it's not appropriate for us to stick to the Consumer Price Index C and use it as a reference when we calculate the operating expenses. I hope the government can take into consideration members' views. The government may not necessarily have to adopt the weighted index proposal. can we have a consolidated formula with reference to the weighted index as well as the CPI? Perhaps we can further gauge the views of members so that we can have an improved proposal. Next, Mr. Kitson Young for the second round. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to talk about the situations in reality. Well, I am elected as a geographical constituency sector's members. If you have just about $200,000, it's quite limited for us to set up an office at the district level. It will affect our service quality. Also, for members of this current term LegCo, a lot of them set up offices at the district level. Previously, there weren't that many members who set up offices at the district level. There were members from the election commission sector as well as the functional constituency sector who did this. For an office set up in a public rental housing estate, for utility charges or utility bills, it costs at least $10,000. If we hire 2 staff, in total we may have to spend $30,000 on salary, and we may have to spend $40,000 on other expenses. And members may have to spend more money on other types of work, so $2,000 is not enough. If we our operation at LegCo, then we may have to cut staff at the district offices. Well, current offices serving some 700,000 people at the district level. I think the government should the actual circumstances. I believe members of the election commission sector as well as functional constituency offices at district level. I think the government should take into account the actual circumstances before. Now the reimbursement ceiling for OOER per year for each about $2.8 million. It's about $2.87 million. If you divide that's about $280,000. Yes, less than $280,000. Any other views from members? Well, we're actually going through together. Well, we have to consult members' views on the level of remuneration and operating expenses reimbursement. The Secretariat on the proposals made by the previous term subcommittee. Well, we're now in a new term of subcommittee. The weighted index proposal was made. I agree with the proposal. Do we agree? Salary expenses 70% of the weighting, or should we adopt a proposal made by the independent commission that is with reference to the nominal index of payroll per person? We can ask members' views on this.
Strategically, if the IC clearly states that they will support the latter, and they also support the weighted index, then it is worth taking forward the weighted index But when it comes to the office expenditure and other expenses, it is reasonable to support the suggestion, which is a scientific approach. Which means that the office operation expenses reimbursement will be following the rental index for Grade C offices published by the Rating and Valuation Department. The rest will follow the composite consumer price index. If members agree, we will propose this method. Just now, Mr. Lai also emphasized we should abolish the one-third reduction in the electrical monthly remuneration for members who also serve on the Executive Council. I'd like to consult members as well. It is something in the past, but I think that we should mention this once again. For other suggestions, we also welcome members' views so that we can follow up on members' view in future discussions. Do we have to increase the wages given the different KPI or function? Well, we can state our views, but under the current mechanism, the Independent Commission on Remuneration for members of the Executive Council and the Legislature and officials under the political appointment system of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. It is a lengthy commission title, but then it plays a very central role. With the current mechanism, it will dictate our future adjustments. Do we have to substantially increase the current amount, that is $2.8 million? Just now, it was also mentioned that this term sees a very special situation. If our extension works are successful in the CITIC Tower for the Legislative Council members working there, they may be able to move back into the electrical complex. Will we have special arrangements in relation to expenditure? That is not a point that is close to the heart of the Independent Commission. That is a special situation. If the works can be completed, will we invite them to move back to the electrical complex? Kenneth Chan, Secretary General, please. We will help members solve the problem. We will depend on the progress of the works. We do not have to discuss this matter at this stage. In relation to consultation with members, do members have any other views? Mr. Stephen Ho. Has the Secretariat considered how the local government of another place decided on their wages of the legislature? The chief executive of Macau is lower than that of Hong Kong. The DAB visited Macau. It is interesting. They do not require a committee. They only set down that the electrical president enjoys 80% of the salary of the chief executive. If members attend the meetings, then your salaries will be increased by 5%. Then there is no longer direct election committee. There is no such situation. I dare not say that the situation in Macau is better than ours, but then we should draw reference from other places. Learning from other places is beneficial as well. We can draw reference from other places. I have the rules of procedures. Do you want to take a look? Well, yes, there are indeed 10% in case of attendance. Members can draw reference. Anything else to add in the consultation with members? We are very efficient. Thank you for giving us your very valuable comments. This is the new atmosphere. I, as a chairperson of the subcommittee, I am very glad as well. Thank you for giving us your very practical comments. Without further comments, the Secretariat will follow up on the views you have just now expressed. Members will also be consulted. There will be a notice. There will not be, well, there is no other business. For the date of the next meeting, the Secretariat will inform you of the date. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.